She lay on the edge of a frozen road, a dark shape against endless white, her leg crushed tight in a steel trap. She no longer tried to escape. Instead, she used her broken body to shield a tiny puppy, barely alive, trembling beneath her chest. To the world, she was nothing more than a discarded tool of the hunt, meant to disappear in the storm. No one was supposed to find her, and no one believed a wounded animal would ever trust a human with its life. But that night, a passing truck slowed down, and the man inside chose to stop changing everything. If you believe that no life should be left to die alone in the cold, subscribe to the channel. This story might just restore your faith in miracles. The snow fell sideways over the outskirts of Anchorage, Alaska, turning the night into a vast, silent blur where sky and earth erased each other without apology. Ethan Walker drove slowly, both hands steady on the wheel of his mud-stained pickup, eyes scanning the narrow road that cut through spruce and ice like an old scar. At 42, Ethan carried himself with the disciplined stillness of a man who had once lived by orders and consequences. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a frame hardened by years of military conditioning rather than vanity. His dark hair, once regulation short, had grown uneven at the temples, streaked faintly with gray. He never bothered to hide. A trimmed beard shadowed a sharp jawline, emphasizing cheekbones carved by fatigue more than age. His eyes, steel blue, observant, rarely blinking, belonged to someone who had learned that hesitation could kill. Ethan had been a Navy SEAL for nearly 2 decades. Afghanistan had shaped him. Losing 3 men under his command during a mission gone wrong had broken something inside him, not loudly, but permanently. Since his honorable discharge 2 years earlier, he spoke little, avoided crowds, and trusted routine more than people. Anchorage was far enough north to keep the world at a distance, and solitude suited the quiet guilt he carried like an extra layer of clothing. The heater hummed weakly. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against ice. Then, just beyond a curve, the headlights caught something unnatural against the snow, dark, low, unmoving, yet wrong in shape. Ethan's foot hit the brake before thought caught up. The truck slid, groaned, then stopped. Silence followed, broken only by wind clawing at metal. Ethan exhaled once. His pulse slowed. Training kicked in. He pulled on his heavy parka, stepped out into the cold boots, sinking deep with each step. The wind burned his face raw, but he barely noticed. He approached the shape cautiously, scanning for traps, threats, movement. It was a dog, a German shepherd. The animal lay on its side, massive even in collapse, its thick sable and black coat crusted with ice. One powerful front leg was caught in a steel hunting trap, jaws clamped cruelly around bone and muscle. Blood stained the snow in dark, frozen petals. The dog's ears were pinned back, teeth bared, not in attack but in warning. Its amber eyes locked onto Ethan's with fierce, intelligent focus. This was no stray. The dog was mature, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, with the build of a working animal, broad chest, muscular limbs, disciplined posture even in agony. A faded scar ran beneath one eye, the kind earned in training or service, not from wandering streets. The dog didn't whine, didn't beg. It endured. Then Ethan saw what the dog was shielding. Beneath its belly, barely visible against the snow, trembled a tiny German shepherd puppy. Newborn, eyes sealed shut for thin and dark, its body no bigger than Ethan's glove. It pressed weakly into the warmth of its injured mother, unaware of the trap, the storm, the inevitability of death closing in. Something twisted in Ethan's chest. For a moment memory surged, unbidden sand gun fire, a wounded teammate bleeding out while Ethan's hands shook despite every drill he'd mastered. He had been too late then. He still heard that silence afterward. The dog growled low, a vibration felt more than heard. Ethan stopped moving. He slowly raised his hands, palms out, a universal signal that transcended species. "Easy," he murmured, voice rough from disuse. He wasn't sure who he was speaking to, the dog, the past, or himself. The wind howled louder, snow biting into exposed skin. The trap was illegal, meant for large game. Whoever had set it hadn't planned to come back soon. Without help, the dog would bleed out or freeze. The puppy wouldn't last an hour. Ethan stood there, the cold creeping through his boots, weighing risk against consequence. He could leave. The rational part of him argued that nature was cruel, that interference changed nothing in the long run, that he owed nothing. But the soldier in him, the man who had once sworn never to abandon his own, refused to step back. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan reached for the flashlight on his belt and set it down on the snow, creating a pool of steady light. The dog's eyes followed every movement. The puppy whimpered a sound so faint it almost vanished into the storm. Ethan swallowed. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out." Above them the storm raged on, indifferent to promises, unaware that on a forgotten road 3 lives had just collided and none of them would walk away unchanged. Ethan knelt slowly in the snow, every movement deliberate, controlled the way he had once approached unexploded ordnance in foreign deserts. The German shepherd's growl deepened, vibrating through the frozen air, but it did not lunge. Its body trembled violently now, not from aggression, but from blood loss and cold. The puppy whimpered again, weaker this time, a sound that slipped straight past Ethan's defenses and lodged somewhere beneath his ribs. He assessed the trap with a soldier's eye. Industrial steel, too thick to pry open bare-handed, designed to hold something large until it died alone. Whoever set it had known exactly what they were doing, and that quiet cruelty hardened something in Ethan's jaw. He pulled off his gloves, ignoring how the cold bit instantly into scarred fingers. Years ago, frostbite had claimed sensation in 2 of them during a winter extraction gone wrong. Pain meant little to him now. He shrugged out of his heavy parka and, speaking softly, tossed it forward so it landed over the dog's head and shoulders. The animal thrashed once, teeth snapping blindly, but Ethan was already on it, using his weight pinning the powerful body with knees and forearms like he once had with enemy combatants. It was a terrible, intimate struggle, warm blood soaking through snow breath, steaming muscles burning. "Stay," he muttered, not as a command, but a plea. The dog weakened faster than Ethan expected. Shock was already doing its work. With one arm bracing the animal, he clawed through snow to where the trap chain disappeared into the ground. A rusted anchor bolt was driven deep beside a tree root. Ethan reached into his truck bed, grabbed a tire iron and wrench, and went to work. Metal screamed against metal. His shoulders protested old injuries, flaring a reminder of the blast that had torn him off his feet years ago and left him with a limp he hid well. Finally, the bolt gave. The chain slackened. The trap still crushed the dog's leg, but it was no longer bound to the earth. That was enough for now. Ethan didn't release the animal immediately. He waited until the dog stopped struggling, until the fight bled out of its body, leaving only breath and pain. Slowly, he pulled back, keeping the parka between them. The dog's head lifted weakly, eyes burning, then dropping again. Ethan exhaled long and shaky. He moved to the puppy next. It was colder than he'd feared, tiny chest fluttering irregularly. He scooped it up gently, surprised by how light it was, like holding a memory instead of a living thing. Without thinking, he slipped it inside his sweater against bare skin. The shock of cold made him hiss, but the puppy pressed closer, instinctively seeking life. He returned to the injured dog, braced himself, and with a grunt born of exhaustion and stubborn will, dragged the heavy body toward the truck. The German Shepherd weighed at least 80 pounds, all muscle and bone. By the time Ethan hauled it into the bed, his vision swam and his breath came in ragged bursts. He covered the dog with a tarp, securing it just enough to prevent movement, then climbed into the cab, cradling the puppy beneath his jacket. The engine turned. Then it coughed. Then it died. Silence crashed down heavier than gunfire. Ethan rested his forehead against the steering wheel. For a moment, just one, he considered laughing. Of course this would happen. Outside, the storm intensified, snow swallowing the road behind him. He checked the puppy. Still breathing, barely. He looked back through the rear window at the tarp-covered shape in the bed. Leaving the dog there would kill it. Bringing it inside the cab was dangerous. He weighed the risks the way he always had, stacking them neatly in his mind. Then he opened the door. He dragged the injured dog into the passenger seat, maneuvering stiff limbs into the cramped space. The cab filled with the smell of wet fur, blood, and wild earth. The dog stirred but did not attack. Ethan shut the door, sealing them together. "All right," he said quietly, voice hoarse. "We're in this now." Outside, the wind howled uncaring. Inside, 3 damaged lives waited through the longest night, bound by a decision that could no longer be undone. The cold crept in slowly like a thinking enemy. It slipped through the seals of the truck doors, pooled around Ethan's boots, and climbed his spine with patient intent. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. Snow battered the cab in steady waves, and the wind moaned with a hollow, almost human persistence. Inside, the space was tight, heavy with breath, blood, and the sharp, wild scent of a wounded animal. Ethan sat rigid in the driver's seat, every sense alert, every muscle braced for violence that never came. The German Shepherd lay across the passenger seat, its massive body curled unnaturally to fit the space. Its breathing was shallow, uneven, each rise of its chest a small act of defiance. The amber eyes tracked Ethan's movements with fading intensity, no longer burning with threat, but with raw vigilance. The dog was still dangerous, Ethan knew that, but exhaustion and injury had dulled its edge. This animal was not surrendering, it was enduring. Ethan respected that. He loosened his seatbelt slowly and shifted his weight, mindful not to provoke. Years of combat had taught him that fear often came from unpredictability, and predictability, even in pain, could buy time. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a spare thermal blanket, the kind he'd carried long before civilian life. Its silver surface crinkled softly. The dog's ears twitched, but it did not growl. Ethan draped the blanket carefully over the animal's hindquarters, avoiding the trapped leg, minimizing pressure. The dog let out a low sound, not a snarl, not a whine, but something in between, ancient and restrained. Ethan nodded once, as if acknowledging a fellow soldier. Beneath his sweater, the puppy stirred weakly. Its tiny body pressed closer to his chest, seeking warmth without understanding its source. Ethan slipped a hand inside his clothing, cupping the fragile form. The puppy's skin was cold, its heartbeat fluttering like a trapped moth. Hypothermia. He'd seen it before in men, not animals, but cold did not discriminate. He remembered a night patrol in the mountains years ago, holding pressure on a wound while snow fell just like this, white and endless. He remembered the quiet afterward. He pushed the memory down. "Not tonight," he murmured, voice barely audible. He twisted in his seat and reached into the back for an empty plastic water bottle. His movements were slower now, fatigue dragging at him. Outside, the engine blocks still held residual heat. He cracked the hood fingers, burning as he siphoned warm coolant into the bottle, careful not to spill. When he returned to the cab, he wrapped the bottle in a rag and placed it on the floor near the dog's body, a small island of warmth in the cold metal shell. Then he focused on the puppy. Ethan unzipped his sweater fully and peeled off his thermal undershirt despite the immediate bite of cold against his skin. He pressed the puppy directly against his bare chest skin to skin covering it again with layers of fabric. His body shuddered involuntarily, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. This was no different than stabilizing a wounded teammate. Temperature, circulation, time. Minutes stretched. The storm screamed outside relentless, but inside the cab, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Ethan rubbed the puppy gently, stimulating circulation, whispering words he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Nonsense phrases, half prayers, fragments of encouragement without structure or belief. His voice cracked once. He swallowed and kept going. Across from him the German shepherd watched. The animal's eyes softened, the sharp edge dulled by something unfamiliar. It shifted slightly, ignoring pain, inching its head closer. The dog's nose twitched, drawing in Ethan's scent, the puppy's scent, the shared warmth. A quiet understanding settled in the cab. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. They were all trapped. They were all fighting the same enemy. Time blurred. Ethan's limbs numbed, his teeth chattered, but he did not stop. Then beneath his palm he felt it, a faint twitch, then another. The puppy let out a thin, broken sound no louder than the creak of settling metal. Ethan froze, afraid to hope. The tiny chest rose more fully this time. A breath. Real. He exhaled shakily, a sound caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He checked the puppy's color, less blue now, more life. Across the cab the German shepherd lifted its head with effort and released a soft, broken whine. Ethan met its gaze. "Yeah," he whispered, "I see it too." Outside the storm raged on indifferent. Inside warmth fought back, fragile but real. The night was not over, but something had shifted. None of them were alone anymore. Dawn arrived quietly, without color or warmth, filtering through the truck's frosted windows as a thin gray promise rather than relief. Ethan woke with his neck stiff and his hands numb, breath fogging the air in shallow bursts. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. Then the weight against his chest shifted, and reality settled back in. The puppy lay tucked inside his sweater, small and warm now, its breathing steadier, its tiny body rising and falling with fragile determination. Relief loosened something in Ethan's chest that he hadn't realized was clenched. Across from him, the German shepherd stirred. The dog's eyes opened fully for the first time since the night before. They were still sharp, but the fevered edge had dulled, replaced by exhaustion and pain, held behind stubborn restraint. The injured leg remained trapped in the steel jaws, swollen and dark, but the bleeding had slowed. Ethan knew that without proper care, infection would take it or the dog soon enough. He stretched carefully, joints protesting. His reflection in the side mirror startled him. Unshaven eyes, bloodshot skin gray with fatigue. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by a night that had peeled away whatever civilian softness he still pretended to have. Outside, the storm had weakened. The wind no longer screamed. It muttered. Snowdrifts still blocked the road, but visibility had improved. Ethan stepped out of the truck, boots crunching loudly in the brittle cold. He scanned the tree line, then the road. No movement. He climbed back in and reached for the satellite phone stored beneath the seat, an old habit from deployments he'd never shaken. The battery flickered but held. The signal came through thin and distorted. He keyed in the only number that made sense. The voice that answered was calm, measured, and unmistakably used to crisis. Anchorage Veterinary Emergency. This is Dr. Sarah Collins. Sarah Collins sounded exactly like someone who had learned to stay composed under pressure. When Ethan later met her, he would see a woman in her early 50s, tall and spare, with iron-gray hair pulled into a practical knot at the base of her neck. Her skin was weathered by Alaskan winters, pale but resilient, and her face bore fine lines that spoke not of age but of years spent squinting into surgical lights and blizzards alike. She dressed without vanity, favoring heavy sweaters and worn boots, and her steady hazel eyes missed very little. Widowed young rumor said Sarah had poured her grief into animals no one else would touch: injured sled dogs, abandoned working breeds, wildlife that blurred the line between pet and wild. She listened as Ethan explained his words, clipped factual betraying the soldier still wired into his speech. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, there was a pause, then a soft exhale. "You did the right thing," she said. "But you can't keep him there. That leg needs surgery. The puppy needs warmth and milk. I'm sending someone." Less than an hour later, a low rumble cut through the quiet. A Park Service snowcat crawled into view, orange paint, dulled by ice and ooze. The driver climbed down, a broad man in his late 30s named Mark Reynolds. Mark had the thick build of someone who'd spent his life outdoors, with a red beard that looked permanently dusted with frost, and a demeanor that balanced humor with caution. Former Army injured overseas, he'd traded one uniform for another and found peace in predictable wilderness patrols. He took in the scene with a single sweep of his eyes. "Hell of a night," he muttered. Not judgmental, just honest. Together they transferred the dog carefully into the snowcat's insulated rear compartment. The German shepherd growled once when moved, then settled, conserving energy. The puppy was placed in a heated carrier Mark produced without comment. Ethan rode in silence beside him, watching the road roll past, feeling something unfamiliar press against his ribs. Not fear, not regret, but responsibility. At the clinic, Sarah moved fast. Her hands were sure, her voice firm but not cold. She assessed the leg, the puppy, then finally Ethan himself, her gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary. "You look worse than they do," she said dryly. He almost smiled. As they prepped the dog for surgery, Sarah paused, fingers brushing aside fur near the ear. Beneath it, faded but unmistakable, was a tattooed serial mark. Not wild, not random. "This dog was trained," she said quietly, "and abandoned." Ethan nodded once. He already knew what that meant. When the surgery doors closed, he sat alone in the waiting room, hands clasped, exhaustion finally pulling him under. Outside, the sun climbed higher, pale and cold but steady. The worst of the night was over. What came next would not be easier, but it would be different. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and old wood, a strange mix that reminded Ethan of field hospitals improvised in places never meant to heal anyone. He sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring at a faded photograph on the opposite wall, a younger Sarah Collins smiling beside a sled dog team, her eyes bright in a way time had softened but not erased. The surgery light behind the closed door glowed steadily, indifferent to the hours Ethan had been awake. For the first time since leaving the service, he felt the familiar tension of waiting without a mission to distract him, without orders to follow. This waiting was personal. When Sarah finally emerged, she pulled down her mask and let out a slow breath. Up close, she looked smaller than her voice had suggested, tall but slightly stooped from decades leaning over operating tables. Her gray hair had escaped its knot, framing a face both stern and kind, the kind of woman who didn't waste compassion but never withheld it when it mattered. "She's stable," Sarah said. "Lost tissue, but we saved the leg. It'll take time and care." Ethan nodded, the words sinking in slowly. "And the puppy?" Fighting Sarah replied, "Like its mother." That earned the ghost of a smile. Later, Ethan was allowed in. The German shepherd lay on a padded mat, leg wrapped in thick bandages, chest rising steadily. The fever had broken. Her eyes opened when he stepped closer. They were clearer now, still guarded but no longer sharp with fear. Ethan crouched, keeping distance, letting her read him in her own time. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured. Sarah watched from the doorway. "She'll need a quiet place to recover," she said, "and someone patient." Her gaze rested on him, weighing. Ethan understood the question she wasn't asking. He thought of his cabin by the tree line, the silence that pressed in too hard some nights, the routine that kept him alive but never quite living. "I've got space," he said finally. The puppy came next. Bundled in a blanket, it squirmed weakly, eyes still sealed shut, nose twitching as if mapping a world it hadn't yet seen. Sarah handed it to him carefully. Bottle fed every few hours. "You sure?" Ethan looked down at the tiny life in his hands, at how naturally it fit there. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Weeks passed quietly. The cabin changed. Where there had once been only the hum of wind and the creak of settling wood, there were now soft movements, the scratch of claws on floorboards, the rhythmic breathing of two animals learning to trust again. Ethan named the dog Shadow for the way she followed him at a careful distance, always present, always watching. The puppy he called Echo because it answered everything Shadow did, a smaller reflection with clumsy paws and oversized ears. Shadow healed slowly. She was disciplined, methodical, clearly trained. She responded to hand signals, held eye contact, waited for permission. But there was damage, too. Loud noises made her flinch. Sudden movements sent her body low, ready to flee or fight. Ethan recognized it immediately. He moved with care, spoke softly, let routines form. Trust grew not through grand gestures, but repetition. Echo grew faster. His coat darkened, his legs strengthened, and his curiosity bloomed into mischief. He chased snowflakes, tumbled over his own feet, and slept curled against Shadow's side. Watching them together, Ethan felt something ease inside him, a tightness he'd lived with for years, loosening just enough to breathe. Sarah visited once, driving out in her battered SUV. She watched Ethan work with the dogs, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You're good at this," she said. "You know that?" He shrugged. "They're teaching me." On a clear morning months later, Ethan stood outside, breath rising in the cold as the sun crept over the trees. Shadow sat beside him, solid and calm. Echo at her feet, tail thumping eagerly. Ethan felt it then, not peace exactly, but direction. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just surviving. He had a pack, and for the first time in a long while that felt like enough. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly wrapped in snow, disguised as responsibility, pain, and a choice to stay when it would be easier to walk away. In the darkest moments, God does not always remove the storm, but He places a life in our path and asks what we will do with the love still left in our hands. Ethan did not save Shadow and Echo because he was fearless or perfect. He saved them because compassion spoke louder than fear. And in doing so, God returned something Ethan thought he had lost forever: purpose. Perhaps that is how grace works in everyday life, not by changing the world all at once, but by changing one heart, one decision, one act of mercy at a time. If you are watching this and feeling tired, forgotten, or wounded by life, remember this: no one is placed in your path by accident. The kindness you give may become the miracle someone else is praying for, and sometimes it becomes the miracle that saves you too. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. We read every one. And if you believe that love, faith, and second chances still matter, subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories that heal. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you through every storm. May He grant warmth to your home, peace to your heart, and light to your path. Amen.